Beauty and the Beast. When a student is found mauled to death, Oz becomes the prime suspect.
We open with Buffy narrating from The Call of the Wild, which shifts to Willow reading to Oz, who is a werewolf in a cage.
In the library in a high school. What a great place to keep a dangerous supernatural creature. And he looks very different from before, which is never explained, but I would say it's definitely a step down.
I am glad they're addressing that he's a werewolf, though.
Agreed. Xander comes in to take over the watch, but immediately goes to sleep.
Buffy and Faith are patrolling together, and they're discussing Scott, who I had to look up who the hell they were talking about. Very memorable character.
And Faith says that all men are beasts.
Which made me think of the title of this episode.
And I wondered where she was staying if we saw that she couldn't afford her apartment. And then some guy gets attacked by something.
I was confused as to whether he was close to them or somewhere completely different, because they didn't seem to hear it.
Me too. The next day, Buffy, Willow, and Oz, who I guess just doesn't sleep for 3 days when he goes full werewolf, are met by Scott and a couple that we've never seen before, so I assumed they would either die or turn out to be monsters.
Their names are Debbie and Pete.
Which I didn't realize until 3/4 of the way through the episode. There are some bad attempts at witty dialogue, but thankfully the scene eventually ends.
In the library, Giles tells Willow, Oz, and Xander about the kid who was killed, and it turns out that Oz knew him, but that doesn't really come up again in this episode.
And Xander tries to say it couldn't have been Oz that killed him, but it turns out they very smartly left the window open in the cage, and Xander was asleep.
Why wouldn't that window be bolted shut? Why would it even be able to open if they know they're putting Oz in there?
Because these characters are not that smart.
Giles is smart. He should have thought of that.
Well, but he's also keeping a werewolf in a cage in a high school.
Touché. Buffy goes to meet with the school counselor, Mr. Platt, who at first I suspected was really the smoking man, but it was not, unfortunately.
He tries way too hard to act cool, as if smoking a cigarette in high school didn't show that enough. And it made me realize that I do not miss the 90s at all.
He manages to disarm Buffy and seems to be a decent counselor.
He questions her about what she's been dealing with, including her running away.
And she tells him about her situation with Angel without revealing all the supernatural stuff, and he gives her something to think about.
Buffy goes to the library and learns about Oz, who suggests it could have been another werewolf. That's when I started hoping it would be his little cousin from last time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Buffy goes out on patrol, and Willow goes to the morgue to investigate the body of the killed kid,
while Faith stays to watch over Oz. And he says that having a Slayer watch over him is overreacting, but one person is already dead.
And he's a werewolf. Buffy is attacked on patrol, and it turns out to be Angel,
who is seemingly feral. They fight and she ends up knocking him out.
And at the same time, Willow's met by Xander and Cordelia in the morgue,
which they apparently had no difficulty getting into. Willow picks out some stray hairs that apparently stayed on the body all through the police investigation, the transport of the body, and the autopsy.
And Buffy chains Angel up in the cathedral spot.
And she finds a goofy-looking outline of his body from when he teleported back or whatever. I was confused at first as to what that was supposed to be.
And then she goes to relieve Faith for a werewolf watch.
And Faith is being a total tool, which is no surprise, when she's dancing around like an idiot by herself, and yeah.
The next morning, Giles opens up the cage where Oz is sleeping. Does this school have custodians? Wouldn't it raise a few questions to find out that the librarian has a naked high school boy inside of a cage in the middle of the night?
Giles finds Buffy asleep instead of watching over Oz, but he doesn't say anything about that. Again, one person is already dead. At least one person.
She doesn't tell Giles that Angel's back. She says she has a dream that he was back to try and get more information.
And I didn't understand why she didn't just tell him that he was back.
Giles says no one has returned from a demon dimension once the gate was closed. But does that mean there's only one gate? Couldn't someone go in one and come out another one?
Yeah, I mean, we already saw Buffy kind of do that in the other episode.
And they are still on a Hellmouth. Seems like there would be other ways to get back.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, clearly there are other ways to get back, because he got back somehow.
And Giles says anyone who came back would have a very small chance of retaining their former self.
Because they would have been tortured for the hundreds of years that would have passed in the other dimension.
What does he say? Something about having a really strong will?
It would take someone of extraordinary will and character to survive that and retain any semblance of self.
Well, that puts Angel out of the running.
And for some reason, Giles doesn't suspect anything about this conversation, even though it goes on forever. Willow comes in and Buffy asks if the student was definitively killed by a werewolf, but she says it wasn't conclusive because she's not a coroner, she's a high school student.
Later, Buffy's eating lunch with Scott, Debbie, and Pete, and Debbie and Pete are being idiots and showing their insecurities.
And Scott doesn't pick up on Buffy's mood and just keeps pressing forward awkwardly with his dumb, unfunny jokes. Buffy finally gets tired of it and leaves to check on Angel,
who does not appreciate being interrupted in the process of defecating on the floor. And I wouldn't be either. I would react the same way.
He is still the same as before, so she goes to visit Mr. Platt to talk about her problems. Which was dumb, because why can't she talk to anyone else? She says she can't, but why?
And her mom has been begging her to talk to her.
And these other characters already know about vampires and what happened with Angel, and it makes no sense.
But it turns out to not matter because Mr. Platt is dead.
And I knew as soon as she walked in and told him not to turn around that he was going to be dead. And it was just really dumb.
I was kind of hoping it would turn around and be Snyder instead.
How did he get killed without dropping his cigarette? And did whoever killed him go around the desk without knocking anything over? I thought it was a little weird.
I think you're reading too much into this one. Pete and Debbie sneak into a shed to make out.
And there's a shot from a distance as if someone is watching them. But we find out later that no one is watching them.
And Pete sees a jar of glowing green ooze and asks Debbie if she drank it.
She says she was trying to get rid of it because he transforms into an asshole when he drinks it.
And then he comically and ridiculously turns into a monster,
revealing that he can transform without drinking it, which is supposed to be like a big revelation or something, but we've never even heard of this stuff before.
And we've never seen Pete before. And then he starts beating Debbie up.
He says he came up with the formula to become the man she wanted him to be. But after a bit, he realizes what he's doing, transforms back into a crybaby.
The gang is discussing who could have killed Platt because it can't be Oz or Angel since it happened during the day.
And I wondered how Giles got the results of the autopsy back so fast. It seems like it's been about 10 minutes since Buffy found the body.
I think you're reading into this one a little too much.
Debbie meets up with Oz, who notices her fake-looking black eye.
And they're both observed by Pete, who can barely contain his rage.
Oz goes to the library, where he learns that he has been exonerated, even though there's still no reason to think that he couldn't have been behind the first killing.
And he observes that both killings share the common denominator of Debbie, so they go to find her and Pete.
Which was a pretty lame conclusion, because, they're all in the same school. Could have been any number of people connecting them. At one point, Buffy points out that Platt didn't drop his cigarette, so he must have been killed instantly, but they made a point about how torn up he was. That was a dumb detail to point out.
I think you're reading a little too far into this one.
Farther than the writers, apparently.
Buffy and Willow confront Debbie and let her know that Pete is a monster, but Debbie is reluctant to tell them where he is, and makes a lot of excuses.
At some point in here, Angel escapes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's in the middle of the scene. They just randomly cut to Angel escaping and then go right back to the same scene.
I gotta get him there somehow. Pete is in the library confronting Oz for putting the moves on Debbie before he comically turns into his monster.
That's a weird way to say it, but okay. He tears off the cage door and tosses Oz around, who doesn't seem to get hurt for some reason. And then he transforms into a werewolf and they fight some more. And everyone else just happens to be right next to the library, because that's what was most convenient for the writers.
They run in, and Buffy picks up the gun that Giles leaves sitting right on the counter in the middle of the school, and she goes to tranquilize Oz.
But Debbie causes her to shoot Giles by mistake.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, I agree.
Gotta get one good moment of humor in here. Pete runs away and is chased by Buffy.
And he finds Debbie and kills her.
While the rest of the gang is trying to take down Oz.
And even though he jumps on Faith, he somehow apparently doesn't scratch or bite her before they manage to put him to sleep.
Buffy finds Pete, and they start to fight.
And then Angel suddenly shows up and kills Pete.
There's a lot of fighting in this episode between monsters.
Which sounds like it would be cool, but it's not.
And after he kills Pete, Angel's face turns back into normal face, and he calls out Buffy's name before collapsing.
Later, the gang jokes about Debbie and Pete being dead, and Buffy goes to talk to Scott, who is sad.
I don't think much came of that conversation. It must have been pretty memorable. And we close with Buffy narrating the Call of the Wild again.
And we see that she has still not gotten Angel a mattress or even a sleeping bag, and just makes him sleep on a concrete floor. Beauty and the Beast. Overall?
Alright, first off, I thought Mr. Platt could have been a good character. I was pretty disappointed he was gone as soon as he was introduced.
They seem to do that a lot.
Yeah. I'm glad everyone recognizes Oz's situation and actually have it be a part of an episode not centered around just that. Gives the characters a little more credibility. What a weird way to tie in abusive relationships to this show. Everything was straight textbook, but concocting that story that Pete was developing his own glowing green ooze to change into some weird monster could have been handled a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, just saying it like that.
He could have just been a jerk, and his transformation was one of the goofiest things I have ever seen. I'm surprised the other characters didn't just start laughing at him as soon as he did it. Like you said, having a bunch of monsters fight each other could have been cool, but unfortunately, it was not. They could watch Van Helsing if they want to see how it's done right. To clarify, I'm joking. That movie also is ridiculous and dumb. And my evergreen question for this whole show is, who cleans the school? All these people are at the school at night, and there's always this property damage and firearms lying around, and by the next day everything is good, and no one seems to have noticed anything. It's very frustrating. And do you think they're going to expand more on the relationship between Buffy and Angel? That would be interesting to see, because that hasn't really been explored yet. I'm interested to see where that goes. Hopefully they'll dedicate some time to it at least. Overall, I thought this episode pulled in a real life issue and tried to tie it in with the lore of the show, but it wasn't done very effectively. I was struggling whether or not to put this in D range, but I don't think it was that bad. I gave it a C-.
I also gave it a C-. For being the episode right after Faith's introduction, she was barely in this episode. I was hoping we'd get more information about her, but one thing I will say is that I still don't like her, and her forced sexual party girl attitude about everything is annoying.
I think you're just intimidated.
No comment. I don't like Scott either. It feels like they're trying to force him on us, but he is not interesting or likable.
I think you're just intimidated.
It was good to get back to Oz's situation and find out how the characters are handling that, which turns out to be poorly, no surprise. And of course I was disappointed with the new werewolf design. The whole Pete thing was pretty dumb, and it felt like they didn't put much thought into it. Again, no surprise. The Angel subplot hasn't progressed much yet, but I'm dreading how melodramatic it's going to become. It's already dumb that Buffy won't talk to anyone about it, and as we've said before, that's always caused problems in the past, so I'm sure it'll work out just fine this time. I find it interesting that we haven't had a new major villain yet for this season. Although the show has somewhat fulfilled my hopes of that villain being Snyder, I do hope we get more of an ongoing storyline that isn't Angel soon, or better yet, learn more about the Watchers. I feel like there are a lot of different directions they could go in that I would legitimately be interested in seeing, but I fear that that's not going to happen. We'll see.